Hello, my name is Ahron Young, the CEO founder of Ticker, and this is Uncommon.
Uncommon is a production by Neuralle, an agency that helps both brands and talent tell their story. To learn more, just visit neuralle.com. That's Neuralle.com. My guest this week, Ahron Young, founder, managing editor, and CEO of Ticker. I was thinking, what's the way that we can open this, get into things? I was thinking, has he ever watched Succession? Because I know you're a bit of a media magnate fan like myself. But I was just curious, do you get back to the peninsula much anymore?
Absolutely. I think during COVID, it was my saving grace when we weren't locked down, of course, was just to get out. And I grew up down in Rye on the back beach there, and there's a beautiful walk. I used to do this every night as a child.
Okay.
And so I would go back there quite regularly, probably every month now, but it was every week for a while. And just walk along. You have to kind of find your own path. I take other people and they absolutely hate it. They say, "What are you doing here? There's no path. You're kind of crashing through stuff." And I'm like, it actually makes me focus on other things other than running a company while looking out at this beautiful Bass Strait. And all of the energy that you get from just the nature is just wonderful.
There's something about the peninsula. I don't know what it is. I have not put my finger on it yet. We were discussing it. Jacob and I were discussing it before. Is it the freshness of the air? Is it?
I think it's proximity from Melbourne. And I mean, it's close to Melbourne, but it's a completely different culture to Melbourne.
Yeah.
So Rupert Murdoch, he grew up in Frankston.
Really?
Cruden Farm, which is where his mother, Dame Elizabeth, lived until she passed away only about 5 or so years ago. But that was where he grew up, down in Frankston.
Yeah, there's something to be said around growing up in that area. I just remember as a kid, growing up in Bentley, it was the most exciting thing ever. Back in the day when there was no Peninsula Link, you always had to go down to Peen Highway.
Took
forever. And everyone would be going at the same time.
Yes.
We had a Holden
Friday
Commodore
night.
wagon.
How was the Sundays trying to get back on a Sunday afternoon?
Oh, it was horrific. We'd do things like, I remember this so vividly, where we'd pack this white Holden Commodore wagon, we'd stack the thing, boogie boards, towels, everything. You'd have to be so well prepared. I remember so many times.
Remember the days where you could call them boogie boards? Now it's like, has to be body boards because we're all very serious.
Very serious. You could have, I remember when it got real serious for me and I'd have like flippers and stuff like that. But like changing in the Sorrento, like bathrooms and stuff like that. So many vivid memories. And then the store where you get like the ice creams or whatever.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
It's great, isn't it? Summers on the peninsula.
Summers on the peninsula. I don't think there's
about 3 months when you can go down. The rest of the year it's blowing a gale.
Now, speaking of childhood, what do you think was sort of the earliest memory for you of telling stories as a kid?
So Rosebud McDonald's, funnily enough, was built. I was in grade 4 at Rosebud Primary School, and McDonald's, this American corporation, comes along to a very non-American corporation area like Rosebud, and there were these huge protests against McDonald's setting up.
Really?
And yeah, it was massive. And I remember they couldn't have a sign that was high in the sky like most McDonald's stores are. It had to be on the ground. And I went to the opening day. I'd never been to McDonald's before, funnily enough, and they gave us like these visors. And I took it back to school, and it was at a time when we were learning about currency. And at play lunch, I started off by creating this mini town. And in the end, as you can imagine, it turned into this huge town where almost every child in the school was involved. And I created a financial system using photocopied money. We had a McDonald's, we had a mayor who was whichever person I fancied at the time as a grade 4-year-old, I'd make them the mayor. And I created like my own television network, and that was where it began, grade 4.
Wow. Why do you think, where did that come from as a kid? Like that, you must have been impressioned by something.
Well, my dad's family had always been business people. They painters and decorators, owned their own factories, stuff like that, had big contracts. And I was always quite fascinated by that. My mum is Spanish and quite a bit of a hippie. She took us to a hippie commune for a while up in northern New South Wales, where I rebelled by building TV studios out of crepe paper. She was rebelling and then I rebelled. And I guess I had just always seen that if you didn't do anything in life, nothing was ever going to come your way. And Yeah, I suppose there was always that energy. Went into drama and acting and stuff like that, but I didn't really like memorizing lines. And so television news kind of felt like that, but it was easier to get a full-time job than an actor.
When you think about your parents in particular, your mum, the hippie, your father, sounds like a conscientious kind of guy.
Yes. I like to flip between them depending on the situation.
Do you know what? It's actually really funny. My parents are the same as well. My dad, the entrepreneur, my mum is involved in the business, but she's definitely more open and creative, and I would say probably very strategic and intelligent in that regard. Were there particular like principles or lessons you still hold to this day from that point in your life, whether it's direct or indirect?
I think my mum is very emotional. So she's Spanish. Her family came to Australia in 1973 when Franco was the fascist dictator of Spain. Her family was rather socialist. She's one of 9, very emotional. She could find emotion out of a stone. And that's great when you're a journalist interviewing someone who doesn't have any emotion, right? And my dad is a kind of person who swears a lot, loves his football, is a businessman. He says to me all the time, Dad used to hire him, I'd fire him by lunchtime. And whereas my mum would never fire anybody, that was kind of the difference. So learning when to turn on those taps was probably the greatest challenge of my life as I was a teenager, learning to not be emotional at the wrong time, to not be rude and cold-hearted at the wrong time. I think gives you some really good skills, but also integrity. It's all about integrity. And we try to make sure, and I say to everyone at Ticker these days, integrity sits on top of the roof of the building. It gets you a long way.
What does integrity mean, though, to you? Does that mean honesty?
I think it's in dealings with people, right? It's the amount of times that you can take a shortcut, and it's so tempting in business to go, I'll take this route because it's easier, or there's a quick buck to be made here. But I always remember Russell Crowe spoke about his career, and he said the amount of times that I was offered to do a Vegemite commercial, and it would have been easy, and I would have been famous for being the Vegemite kid. But I knew that would always prevent me from being taken seriously later on down the track. And not that doing a Vegemite commercial means that you don't have integrity, but thinking long term, thinking broader picture when you are confronted daily with opportunities to make a quick buck is what I mean.
Yeah, and we were talking about that in the kitchen. It's one of those things that in business, because you have these ideas of grandeur, there's all these, it's like not a devil on your shoulder, but there's all these little things that are, giving you an opportunity to take that quick short-term action as opposed to thinking in the long term.
I think you probably learn the hard way. And then after many attempts of trying to take a shortcut and realizing that business is a game of snakes and ladders, you figure out pretty quickly which are the snakes.
You were probably one of the lucky ones, I'd say, early on. I mean, you graduated from Rosebud High School, and you were lucky enough where you grew up in an era where you didn't have to go to uni to learn this thing. You went straight into a cadetship.
I don't know, actually. I don't agree with that.
Really?
Yeah. This may have been a different path, but it wasn't the easiest path.
Right.
I would rock up to job interviews and you would have this old school prick of a news director, I could name about 50 of them, with their, arms behind their head, feet with the boots on the table, saying, "Can I swear on this podcast?"
Yeah, you can swear all you want.
"Who the fuck are you?"
Yeah.
And I say, "I'm Ahron. You asked me to come for an interview."
Yeah.
He'd be like, "Where's your CV?" I said, "Well, in here." I thought that's what the conversation was about. "Which uni did you go to?" "I didn't go to uni." "Get the fuck out."
Really?
So I wouldn't say it was easy. Yeah, it was.
So they still expected you to have gone to uni back then?
Well, yeah, but the thing is that eventually I thought to myself as I'd walk out the door, I wonder what uni he went to, because I bet he didn't go.
Yeah.
Because uni probably when he began wasn't a thing for journalism. So that would be the question I'd start to ask back.
Well, that was the thing is I always saw
so learning to be a smart ass in interviews was probably the first thing.
I would say that in that era, particularly his era, and to the extent when you were getting into it, uni, I just would have assumed uni wasn't a prerequisite to getting in the business.
No. I mean, we're talking about the late 90s, 2000. So I graduated in 1999. 2000, I started looking around. I mean, I've been doing work experience everywhere that I possibly could right throughout high school. So Win TV, 3RPP, which was the community radio station there in Murdoch, and down Mornington Peninsula way. and then the local newspaper, which was based in Rosebud. And they were a whole bunch of people who used to work for the Murdoch local papers, left and started their own. And they were wonderful. They were so crazy. They used to have their board meetings on the side of the Mornington Peninsula Freeway because they thought that their offices were being bugged by Fairfax. So I'd be cruising on to work and there'd be my three bosses on the side of the road having their board meeting about the future. It was just...
Local news bugged by Fairfax.
But it was great. Like, that's the sort of stuff that I've taken today. We don't have our board meetings on the side of freeways, but, things like they thought that Fairfax was going to launch a local paper. So they thought about every version of the potential name and went and trademarked the name before Fairfax could. And that was the sort of stuff they'd come up with. And I just loved that. I mean, there were these glaring problems at our own newspaper.
They were focused on the
side of a freeway buying trademarks. It was great.
So in hindsight, when you look at that period of your career, was there... I said to you, the first few jobs I had was with Chris Gore straight out of uni.
Yeah.
I learned some really valuable lessons in those 9 months I worked, with him. Is there something that really stands out to you from that era that you've pulled even to this day at Ticker?
Yeah. Only focus on the things that the customer can see.
Yeah. Don't worry about trademarks, just...
Yeah, focus on the things that the customer can see. I'm shocking at worrying about trademarks, but I've got a team around me who cares about those things. I'm very much probably similar to how you've described yourself about the growth and about the vision. That is wonderful, and every business needs that. But someone has to run the day-to-day. Your staff need to know who to go to in a crisis. You need to make sure that if it isn't you, and if you aren't naturally a person who cares about these things, that you have someone on the team who does, and that your staff knows that that person does. It's not that I don't care, it's that my brain capacity can only focus on so much. And I'd rather really concentrate the very little brain capacity I have on exciting new projects.
Yeah. Tell me about dipping your toes into this entrepreneur game. It seems like you created, I found it really funny. You're not a friend, you're a fan of Ted Turner.
Yeah,
as am
massively, yeah. I'm a fan of a lot of media moguls though. I grew up reading all the books as a kid.
That's true, but I did find it really funny that the Como Network News does stand for CNN.
Actually, no, Como was a name that I came up with. So the story there is I've been working at this local paper. I had a guy take over who had very much of an alcohol addiction, and it was a pretty terrifying place to be. He would come in, you'd never know what mood he was going to be in. I left. And imagine going from high school to your dream job. I'd sent out 365 letters to every TV and radio station, got 365 very pleasant thanks, but you've got no experience. So I worked out I've got to get experience. So I got this job at the local paper. It was great. You had to do everything, page setting, writing, editing, photos, everything, which I loved, by the way. And then this guy takes over. And I bought the company, was his retirement project, didn't know how to run a local newspaper, changed every single thing about it you possibly could. And bizarrely, the local community gave up on it and circulation plummeted, which only made his anger worse, which then meant that, there wasn't any money for us. So I left. The paper shut down about a month later.
Wow.
Really sad to watch, but also a great learning lesson for a budding entrepreneur of what to not do. And I think learning what to not do is probably more important
100%.
Than what to do, because you have to go down and find your own path. But learning the key lessons of don't change this, don't lose an audience that care about their product that they're paying for. Don't change days of newspaper circulation because you want to chase something, etc. And so then next thing, I'm working at Woolworths in Mentone. And here's my great career has taken off, and now I'm back as a checkout chick doing Christmas Eve, and I had to do it, but went into community radio and then did that for about 3 or 4 months and worked out that if I could do this for them for free, I could probably start my own business. And I was living with a friend just in South Yarra, and I'd always had this fascination by Channel 10's Como building. Because it was kind of, as a kid, my dad would take me. There had been this fun festival which was opposite. It's where that huge tower is now on the corner of Chapel Street and Toorak. It was called the Fun Factory. And while all the kids were at the Fun Factory, I'd be standing at the window looking at Channel 10. So, and go, wow, that's the Fun Factory.
Yeah.
Like, they get to create television in there.
Yeah.
Like, these idiots are putting $2 coins in, hoping for a friggin' toy to come out. And that was where the name for Como Network News came along.
And you realised that you could sell basically news broadcasts to these people?
Well, working in that community radio station through high school, I learned that they were all paying 3AW $700 a month to get access to their news.
Damn.
But I figured that there were that many community radio stations in Victoria who couldn't afford $700 a month, but they could probably afford $100. And if I got enough of them, and just out of my mate's lounge room, I bought a microphone with my hard-earned Woolworths money and started a radio news business doing breakfast and evening bulletins, which got the attention of 3AW, obviously, because I was undercutting them, and they gave me my first Metro job.
Well, okay, that makes
no uni needed.
that makes a lot of sense now, because I had here you moved back into the corporate news. You moved into the corporate news media world in
first
2003.
Metro job.
So 2002 was Como Network News. 2003. So basically, what did they say to you? Were they like, "Hey, just come work for us, and we'll pay you more"?
So, oh gosh, how did it happen? So breakfast and drive, obviously, are the big radio things. And so I would do those bulletins pretty easily. And I mean, it was a lot of fun. I had neighbours and friends who were my reporters, and I just, back in those days, fax them a script at their work at like KPMG. And I found this little device at Dick Smith that I could record on a mini disc player, their reports on the phone. So they'd call me, I'd plug this thing into the speaker of my phone from their desk at KPMG, read the report, I'd fax them, and that was my state political reporter.
No.
So I had all these different types of people. But learned very quickly that is the job. It's all smoke and mirrors. And getting back into corporate, I worked out it's all smoke and mirrors, just with an HR department.
Yeah.
That was the only difference. And people who took themselves very seriously and were always involved in clubs.
And production value that's just a little bit better.
You would be surprised.
No, I'm not surprised. I've seen it.
You'd be surprised.
I've seen it.
Yeah. So
we get people like who've come in like yourself. You've got this background in media, and they come into the studio here and they're like, "Oh, wow, this is interesting." I'm like, I actually asked someone once, like, don't you guys have like ridiculous setups? They're like, no.
Well,
really.
I know people who work at a very prominent television show filmed here in Melbourne, and they're still shooting in standard definition. They have massive server issues, and we've just upgraded our server over the past week. And I look at them like, why don't you just do that? It's like a couple of grand. And there's just like this confusion of, what are you talking about? Upgrading the server at this television station. And I'm like, good luck with your future, mate.
I've always wondered that, like, if for an industry that is very meant to be forward-thinking, open and creative, there's a lot of rigidness in technology and structures.
There's this funny thing I like to call debt, where they've all bought each other. Their debt pile is so high that they have no more money to be able to spend on infrastructure or people.
Yeah, zombie companies. The interest
100%. It's
bigger
crazy.
than the
it's
cash
crazy.
flow.
Yeah. And that's where people like you and I can come through and go, you know, we love what you guys do. I see myself as mainstream, but there is a better way of managing this company.
Yeah.
And it isn't about which lovely Melbourne inner urban school you went to.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. And I mean, it's very interesting to see the way that you went to market with all that. I've got to say, just with the looking at your background, you know, 3AW News, 2 years there.
I didn't fit in, by the way. That was an awful experience.
Really?
Oh, absolutely awful. Yeah, I mean, it was awful. It was at a period where news was changing, or people who worked in news was changing. So everyone was over 30. And here's me, I was 20 years old, just about to turn 21. It was the last question the news director asked me after he'd given me the job. And he's like, so how old are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm 20, turning 21. And he's like, and straight away there was just the culture. And that was something I learned about newsrooms. And it's probably all over the world, but it's part of our British background culture. Newsrooms aren't generally friendly places of people. Yeah, the promos of backslapping and we're all great mates, so let's sing Kumbaya. They're very, very competitive. and they break into little cliquey groups, and I've seen that my entire career. I've always felt like an outsider.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I know someone who's a presenter on Channel 7 News, younger, and you could see the dynamic in the newsroom, let's say.
It's been in the Herald Sun, that newsroom. They're divided. They've literally got one reporter isn't allowed to cross over the Berlin Wall in the middle. It's unfortunately how it is. And a lot of it is ego. A lot of it is, I mean, there was a news director at Channel 7 who used to put the blokes on full-time and the females on casual and promise them the next full-time job. What sort of culture does that create?
Jesus.
Like, you might say competitive, great, but it also creates a culture of I'm going to kill you. And then you're not fighting the opposition, you're fighting yourself.
Well, all I think about is that clip on Channel 7 where these two female anchors were arguing over who could wear a white.
That was Channel 9.
It was Channel 9?
Yes, that was Channel 9. That was the afternoon news. I think Amber Sherlock and Julie Snook were involved in that went quite famous. But
that was brutal.
That is how it is. I've never witnessed that. I've never had anyone say, get that black jacket off. Most blokes wear black jackets. We'd all be in trouble.
Live or just in general?
You know, there's a misnomer that it only matters how you look if you're a woman in TV. I've never actually believed that. Men are watched just the same. It's different because the audience expects different things from men from women.
I wouldn't even say it's to do with how they look. I would say it's more of a power play than anything.
Maybe. I remember doing or internship at the ABC when I was 19, and on a weekend, Kathy Boland was the weekend news anchor, and I would go down at reception at the end of the night, 7:30, and would wait for a taxi to go home. And the phones were off the charts, like the switchboard had lit up. And so I was just listening in, as you couldn't help but do, what are people ringing up about? And it was all about Kathy Boland's hair. And it was all women ringing up to complain about her hair.
Jesus.
Yeah. But I can't imagine that they do that about a guy. But as I say, people care. People want different things out of different types of anchors.
Yeah. Well, look, you had a lot of time. I mean, I think I counted about 15 years, 3W, RT, you helped launch a state-run TV organisation, which would have been fascinating.
Which we didn't know at the time. That was great. What an experience that was.
But even then, it just would have been very insightful because, you know, Al Jazeera is the same.
Yeah.
People always comment that Al Jazeera is somehow reputable and that RT and others aren't. They're basically the same. They're all state-funded.
I think in the 90s, so I've often wondered this, where does this all come from? So in the 90s, you had BBC World News and you had CNN. Obviously, CNN massive. Everyone loves CNN, knows CNN. It's a household brand, not just a name, even if you don't watch it. I don't know anyone who watches CNN on a daily basis, but everyone knows it, right? And it came about in the early 80s when Ted Turner, as you talk about, and he went through hilariously the same sorts of things that I go through on a daily basis. But he went too big too quick, I think, in terms of his money. He spent too much money on things that people can't see. 1990, so it wasn't for 10 years that they actually became known for something, and that was the Gulf War. Up until then, they were referred to by the networks as Chicken Noodle News, CNN. And then they became this huge thing. What happened is a lot of different countries looked at CNN and said, that's America's soft power.
Yes.
Well, the BBC, that's the UK's soft power. And they realised that if you disguise PR as news, you can create something extremely exceptional.
Yeah.
And that's what they've all done.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I've always found that fascinating. I went through an era of like, let's say a year, maybe 18 months ago, where I read everything Edward Benet's Persuasion, Propaganda, all those sort of original books, and looking at how those sorts of things are done. And you do start to realise like the ABC is Australia's soft power in the region. Yeah. And I think when iView and digital was launched, and particularly when Turnbull made like a $300 million investment in the external broadcast features, so like pushing it outside of Australia, I started to realise, okay, wow, this is just like that. It is a soft power.
We have a good story to tell, Australia, haven't we? And I remember the ABC's Asia Pacific Network, and I don't have much fond to say about it. It was dreadful. It used to be on ABC2. The sets were orange and red. It was like, why are you not just making it look like ABC News? Why are you making it look like, you know, this kind of underground porridge soup?
Yeah.
It just didn't. Well, tomato soup is what I think of when I look at it. And so they didn't quite understand the soft power, even though it was soft power.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the ABC, it's SBS as well.
Right.
It was part of this deal with the ABC and SBS. It was before all the recent happenings with the Morrison government, but I just remember it was super, super fascinating. And I can see that. I mean, look, you can see it locally. I said to you before, Greek family, Greek background. Everyone who has a Greek family has watched the Greek news on SBS, has watched whatever language news, and then they're in on the SBS thing. My parents would always watch. They didn't watch Greek news, but every night on top of Channel 7, they would always watch. My mum said to me, I listened to Channel 7 in the background, but if I was serious about the news, I'd turn on SBS.
There you go.
So, you think about what that could do over a generation. They were second gen.
Yeah.
So,
what I'd be keen to know, though, is are the younger generation doing the same? And are they still tuning into SBS?
Still has an affinity
Really?
for me. Not that I tune into it, but I will, like with yourself on social media, I'll pay attention to certain things.
And so do you find yourself tuning into the news networks that your parents watched as that 30-minute bulletin on SBS through your social media? Do you follow that network on Facebook or Twitter?
Of course not. No.
Interesting.
You only watch for the clips.
Because Facebook would tell you that's exactly what you do.
Really?
Yeah.
The only thing I really tune in for news-wise is clips.
Yeah, right. Okay.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Ticker TV, Ticker rather, and 9 are the two I'm actually subscribed to when I think about it.
Yeah.
And I got to give it to 9. They've been pretty good considering they're an old network with how they do things, but it's still so sensationalized.
They really have changed immensely. So when I first joined Sky in 2006, directly after Russia Today, the Sky Melbourne was based at the Channel 9 studios in Bendigo Street, Richmond, the home of television. It was absolutely incredible to work there. Another place where I learned it's only what you put on the screen that actually counts. And they were very old-fashioned. I mean, they were using tapes. Sony would come in and say, guys, what are you doing? I remember the Chinese buyers who eventually took over came in for a tour, and they thought that it was like the TV station's museum, but it was actually the newsroom.
Holy shit.
Sony wasn't making the machines that they were using, and they had to use the proceeds of the sale of the site at Bendigo Street. I think they got 50 million for it to be able to afford the new technology and the new building in Burke Street.
No.
Yeah, that's how they did it. But they, ever since they moved, they really changed and they really became a digital-first company. They are still heavily reliant, obviously, on the advertising revenue from that 6 p.m. news service, but they are at least trying, and they're doing a good job.
So you spent 12 years at...
13 at Sky.
Oh, it was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Initially news anchor and became Melbourne bureau chief.
No, initially producer. They didn't know what to do with me. And the way that had happened is my mum had a baby when I was 24 living in Moscow. And I thought I better come back to meet my little brother. And I'd been living in the UK before Moscow. And then I just happened to be flying out of Sydney. So on the way back, overseas, as you can imagine, I've been doing a lot of work for Australian networks. So the death of the Pope in 2005, John Paul II, the London bombings in July of that year. I was doing a lot of live crosses back to 3AW and 2UE, etc., and Sky News. They pay you $50 a pop, basically, and that kept me afloat. But then you get your phone bill for international calls, and it was more than what you'd made. Yeah. So it wasn't very good business sense, but which was another lesson, I might add. And so I thought I better drop in to Sky to say hi and thank them, but absolutely had no intention of taking a job. And then 2GB, where I had a friend who was a news director, he said to me, come in for a meeting. And his meeting got pushed back. He actually wanted me to become their police reporter. And the meeting got pushed back and Sky got in first and they offered me a job. And next thing I've got this contract. And it took me a month to decide whether I wanted to actually work there.
Really?
Because,
why?
Well, that little boy from Rye had a taste of living overseas and just loved the way that people thought differently compared to us Melburnians. And after a year and a half, I felt like, this kind of umbilical cord whiplash was bringing me back to my hometown.
Interesting.
First to Sydney, and then that was that.
So you spent that time at Sky News, and it was obvious that, I know that they shut down Sky News Business. Your Money had launched and then got shut down not long afterwards. It was pretty clear that there was going to be a product like Ticker that needed to be around. It's just that as ever with Australia, we're behind on things. And I think you were the one who realised that the entrepreneurial bug had bit.
So imagine being an entrepreneur, dying to become one, but couldn't quite find the product.
Yeah.
I had more trademarks listed, companies registered, ideas half launched.
Website addresses.
Website, I was probably Weebly's biggest customer. With all these different things, from production kit that I'd designed on the road for Sky, that I thought, I'll buy all this stuff from Alibaba and put these journo kits together. I only shut that business down a few weeks ago, actually, because I had never done anything with it. And just was learning about the marketing side of things, and also trying to figure out, how do you get a new business idea out there? Everyone knows of Sky News or Channel 7 or 9. They're legacy brands that have been around for a very long time, that have huge budgets behind marketing. But the world has very much changed, and it's now a level playing field. And the things that kept them up here are now giant overheads. Imagine having to pay for a satellite in space so that you could broadcast. Imagine having to launch one. Imagine having to pay for a tower on Mount Dandenong to continue to broadcast. Imagine having to have a massive 4-story minimum office in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, so that you can fulfill ACMA's local requirements, so you can do local news that doesn't make you any money. Imagine you're the sales department and you've got I was once told that 3AW's studio space costs them $2 million a year in rent in Melbourne.
Jesus.
At the top of what used to be the Age building. Imagine the poor sales department waking up in the morning going, we've got to make a cool $2 million before we've even made any money to pay for ourselves, let alone the staff in the newsroom. And, we were on shocking money at 3AW News.
Yeah.
It was so bad. I went into that meeting when I got the job thinking I was going to be on, 65 grand or something. And he's like, so it's 36. And I'm like, 36 an hour? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, 36,000 a year. And I'm thinking, how do you have an apartment? How do you have a car?
Yeah.
Like, you're thinking of the maths of what that equates to. And that's news. There's no money in it.
Yeah. And obviously for you guys, you're able to launch without any of this stuff. You said to me earlier you were down, you live around the corner basically in East Melbourne.
Yeah,
East Melbourne
that's where I lived.
Gardens is what they call
Wellington Gardens.
Wellington Gardens.
Yep, it's called.
Down at Bedgegood, having a coffee. This idea for Ticker came along. How quickly did it snap into your head that this was going to be what essentially news was that you were previously doing, except you were going to offer it in a streaming fashion?
So about 3 years ago, I had a friend who had been living in Silicon Valley named Keegan, who had said to me, you should check out this new news network in New York called Cheddar.
Ah, okay.
It's a streaming news service, really cool. They cover sexy business, and they've just sold for $200 million.
Jesus.
And that wasn't important because I was seeing dollar signs. That was important because it said that you didn't have to own a satellite or a TV tower on Mount Dandenong to be valued at something. You could never recreate Cheddar. We're not based in New York. Australia is very different. Unlike America, where startups are either in New York City or in Silicon Valley, Australia is completely all over the place. And I'd learned that because in my last couple of months at Sky, I've been hosting a show called the Innovation Forum, and not just hosting, but EPing it as well, essentially. And was being introduced to all of these incredible startup founders who had no airtime in Australia, were always trying to get capital, constantly complaining about a lack of angel investment in the country, a lack of marketing, Victoria is against New South Wales. Everyone is separate.
Yeah.
Everyone. It's like the old colonial days still when it comes to the startup. And if you're any good, you're on a plane to Silicon Valley is the reputation. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's the reputation of it. So you start to think about, all right, I've realized through what I was doing at Sky that there is money to be made in this field. No one is telling the stories of these cool people. If I mix it in with international news, so as you probably know, as an entrepreneur, it's not trying to find an idea, it's battling out all the shit ones to focus on a really simple one.
Yeah. And only that. because
and only that.
Yeah, because that's the issue is.
And then you have to guard it, and I didn't do a very good job of guarding it. I was so happy to have other people jumping in on my dream, and so welcoming. And I literally opened the floodgates was a word that we used all the time. We had all these shows, all these people, and none of them were what I considered our brand to be. And so therefore, we're filling hours, but not with the content that was working or that had been my dream. And one of those people actually said to me, you need to focus only on yourself. And I had never done that. I'm a journalist. I'm always thinking of the audience. You don't want to be not liked. If you're not liked as a journalist, you're very much unemployed, or you're an opinion host. My version was that, I'd come from that grand news anchor where you have to be familiar and friendly and everyone has to like you and trust you. And all of a sudden I'm having to pull anchors aside and say, I'm really sorry, but your show isn't going to work. It's just not working. And I felt awkward about it. And then I realized that I actually needed to hire someone who could do that job.
Yeah. You. Yes, you. Are you intrigued by this episode? If so, go to our footer on the website, neuralle.com, neuralle.com. We're going to give you an insight. Each week it's going to be on business, marketing, or a topic that we covered in the episode. At all, we'd love your support and it would help us in developing the intellect around this series. But without going on too much longer, let's get back into this episode. I remember reading that you had 6 days from when you picked up the keys to the first broadcast.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So you picked them up on the Tuesday, broadcast Monday. You were pushing out a bunch of content with some assistants, and then you obviously had people that filled the content gaps of different shows. I was really curious and it was really impressive to me, and you may look back on it as like a cringy moment, but seeing your first studio and how small it was, to me, it reaffirmed what I had done and what we had done when we first started out and how small everything was. I used to interview people in the fucking kitchen. I used to have to turn the the fridge off so the sound wasn't bad and you wouldn't get the low hum of the fridge.
Yeah.
Just for an hour and a half. So,
well,
what was that first year like for you?
Okay, so I think the anxiety and the PTSD from that first year is the first thing that hit me of what that's like. I mean, it was 20-hour days. It was no sleep. It was dreaming about the things that I had to do when I was sleeping, no joke. It was relying on people who I didn't really know. It was being let down and surprised by different people at different times. It wasn't all, don't get me wrong, it was a wonderful experience. I will always remember it. But it was terrifying because at that stage I hadn't worked out not to care about what other people think.
Yeah.
So imagine you've left a TV news network, you've worked your way up for a very long time. It's going one way, you're going another. It's finally time to go. You then decide you're going to launch something that in Australia, people go, oh, he's launching a news network. He's left his job to go and try and compete. Never the intention at all. Because, again, I was looking towards what Cheddar was doing. No one says Cheddar's like CNN, right? So it's just on television and talks about news.
Yeah.
In this country, we see anyone who does that as the same. It's a very small industry. So this was to try to do something completely different. That mate who I'd mentioned, Keegan, who had worked in Silicon Valley and had first raised my attention, he'd really helped me to define and refine what Ticker was going to be. Originally, Ticker was going to be called NewsJet, and it was going to be a news network about the aviation industry because I saw this massive niche. YouTube views when it comes to airplanes get huge things, but no one has ever done it in a high production way of like a news network with auto cues and daily news about aviation industry. Luckily, I didn't do that because COVID kind of would have wiped that idea out.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a little. So that's when I came up with the idea of Ticker, and he helped me refine it. And I sat in that cafe and designed the logo. I think it was like a 2-second job. It was meant to look like the tickets from the tickers back in the 1920s in Wall Street that used to go around. That was what it was based on.
And so that's where the name comes from.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, Ticker is the thing at the bottom of your screen on the news.
Yeah.
Ticker is also your heart. And that was the idea, to be a news channel with heart.
Okay. There's so many questions I've got. I mean, the thing that stood out to me was that first year you pretty quickly worked out that the go-to-market wasn't going to work.
No
I think
way.
you're originally charging $1.
That was someone else's idea. And
Was it?
Yeah, so this is what I mean.
Yeah.
Right, so you surround yourself with people who are going to believe in your dream, but they don't quite get your dream. And Keegan had come from a world where, and he had a lot of great ideas, don't get me wrong, but Keegan had come from a world where you build up a to-market product, you then raise capital, you then retire, and who cares if it ever makes any money? And I'm like, well, unless SoftBank have their eyes set on Australia, I don't know anyone else in the world of business who thinks, let's just launch something that's never going to make any money. And I was like, how's this ever going to work? So my gut instinct was, this is a terrible idea, but I was listening to someone else.
Right.
And I had no choice but to listen to someone else. At the time, I felt, anyway, looking back, I should have been a lot stronger and thus have become. But we launched with friends of his. Everyone was a friend of his. He'll do this, he'll do that. They'll design the website. And all of a sudden, I got all these people involved in the business who now have equity in the business who I haven't even signed off on or agreed to or understand, but I trusted one person. Eventually, it worked out that the emperor had no clothes and that the $2 million that he was planning to raise for the business, he'd, I think, raised $5,000, and it was a mate of his who come in as a convertible note, meaning we had to pay him the $5,000 back a year later, and had to make really tough decisions with a friend. And we had to ditch the app, which was late and didn't do all the things that it claimed it would, or he had claimed it would. And everything had essentially been a disaster in that regard. But the idea worked. And what I started to notice was we were inundated on that first day with over 1,000 people, PR companies, everyone going, oh my God, this is the thing we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
So even though you've got all that stuff happening in the business that's making you panic and stressed, we still had a business. People wanted to buy something from us. We had a service. It was essentially me interviewing people that people wanted to buy their clip. They wanted to come on. They wanted to be able to put on their website, their LinkedIn, their Facebook, their YouTube. I was interviewed by Ahron Young, and it was a great interview, and it was about my business, and it wasn't an ad. But we noticed people started buying products because of it. And all of a sudden it was an understanding of this is what the business is. It isn't by having an app that you have to pay $59 a year to download to get all of your business news, which, by the way, you can get from everywhere else for free. Because that idea was never going to work. That's why my gut told me this isn't going to work. But very, very quickly, we were able to pivot. And we often hear that word, and we heard it all year last year about businesses pivoting or failing. But I really had this burning belief when I went to bed every night, when I woke up every morning, this cannot fail. I will turn off. I got off Twitter. I got off Facebook. I got off absolutely everything. So I would not hear any negativity. I would just focus on finding a way to make money.
And I'm really curious about, because you got two essential areas of monetizing, which was
5. Only 2 you know about.
Or 2 I know about, which is in-program brand sponsorships and branded content. So one of them that really pricked my ears was they could come in for an interview and talk about a certain predefined topic, which is part of the interview, correct?
So we get about 20 pitches an hour.
Okay.
From different PR people around the world. 80% are now coming from the United States, interestingly. And that's only been a recent thing, but a great thing for us. They come in, we have half-hour news every hour of the day from 7 a.m. through to 10 p.m.
Okay.
And in that top half hour of news, we can fit in essentially 4 interviews with people. So you could come in to talk about your podcast, right? You've come on Ticker, you've been interviewed by a news host. As someone said, it looks like you're on Channel 9, but you're not. And no one cares about branding anymore because it's all about online. So all of a sudden we've got this news service that people are going, this looks legit. And that's what mattered. And it took me back to all those years of realizing that it was all smoke and mirrors in the first place. But people liked what we were doing. They liked the tone. They liked to be part of something new. They come in, and in the first few months, I was up until 11 o'clock at night, having worked all day, clipping up people's interviews to send them. when someone said to me, why are you charging for that?
Yeah, that's what I was curious about. Is what were those first conversations like when you started charging people?
Some were very understanding.
Yeah.
Others, usually hilariously PR people, hated it because
because they want free spots.
Well, hang on. What I fucking loved was that they are charging a client for a service to get them on to Ticker, and then they get upset that we would charge them. We don't charge you to come on, by the way. I would never do that. When I talked about integrity, there is no integrity in charging someone for an interview. But if you then expect the service of me hiring someone to edit and to clip that up and to send that to you and to do all the work that goes with it, not to mention the IP rights, not to mention the copyright, I'm going to charge you for that. Not a huge amount.
Yeah.
But there is a cost. At Sky News, it was $1,300. At the ABC, it's $850. And then if you want it in HD, it's an extra $80. And then it's per hour if it's archival footage of the amount of time it takes. Wow. And on it goes. And it's only a 1-year license. Channel 9 charges you. They all charge you. So what I discovered is the reason why these PR companies have come to Ticker was they were hoping it was a new place that they get the content for free instead of trying to get onto like Channel 9 Perth's. They do like this chat show segment to fill time, no doubt. And then they would get them on there and then they started charging. So they're like, we don't want to be on here anymore. So I just loved the gall of these PR people who were getting upset that we happened to charge for a clip, which they didn't want to have to tell their client about. Yeah. I thought that was great and fought that head on and we won. Yeah. And they all came back. And in quite a few cases, the clients who we interviewed left the PR companies and signed up for a deal directly with Ticker. And that was when I really realised that we were onto something. Okay. And that happened at the beginning of last year. And those very people who would call me up upset, the PR owners, about what we had done, were now losing clients to us, and they were calling up really upset about that.
Mm. Yeah, because this is something that we've considered for a while because we get immense amount of pitches. You know, it's non-stop. And I thought there's got to be something in this because, you know, Jacob's in here sitting down doing all this work. He produces the entire episode.
Yeah.
Well, it has been. That's the thing.
Well, yeah, but essentially,
why aren't I charging for it?
Well, but that's exactly it, right? So Rupert Murdoch realised, he was the first to realise, that there has to be a price on news. Journalists cost money. Printing presses cost money. We're all okay with spending $1 for the Herald Sun. I think it's about $50 for a paper now because it's so hard to find. But when it went online, there was this expectation that it would all be for free because we're all paying for our internet services or our iPhones or whatever it might be. So therefore, the service came free. But it just doesn't work that way. Journalists have landlords too and have to eat too. And someone has to pay the bills. And there was really no other way to make that work.
Yeah. Yeah, I never understood why that was an issue, but I know we need to do something about it. And so I was like I said, in that interview, when I realized that, when you said that, I was like, oh.
Well, so then it wasn't just about figuring out how to make some money. It was about figuring out how to make more money, right? So running a business off people either sponsoring their own shows meant that you weren't going to have a very high quality show. And then people buying their clips meant you had to produce a lot of clips, which meant that you were now in a game of very small margin and high volume. So when I started thinking about what is a business of very small margin and high volume, I was reading the book about the guy who founded McDonald's. We've all seen the film, The Founder, of course. Great film with Michael Keaton. But I read the book about the guy that he plays. And when I get involved in a book like Coca-Cola or whatever it might be, I become obsessed with the product they're talking about. So this was on my holiday, summer holiday early last year. And I went to Victoria Gardens and sat out the front of McDonald's in the food court for 4 hours and just watched. They must have thought I was like planning some sort of coup or something. But I'm sitting there with a notepad and I'm watching everything. And the one thing I actually took away was when you're in the car park at McDonald's, the thing that they get you through the door is the $2 hamburger. That's all you see. $2 hamburger, $2 McFlurry, blah, blah, blah. When you get in to the counter and you look up at the board, you can never find that $2 hamburger or that $2 McFlurry. They're serving you up meal deals. So I started to think, what's the meal deal that you would have at Ticker with these clips. And then thought about, well, if we looked after all of the marketing, so it's not just about giving them the clip to put on their LinkedIn, but what if we put it on our LinkedIn and our Facebook? Channel 9 News won't put your story about your business on their news site, but we can. That's the difference. So we started doing that. That was an additional fee. And we came up over time with 4 different packages, which meant that our news was paying for itself. We could afford to pay journalists and more journalists, more directors, more producers, make our news content better. And then more PR people would want to come in because our news content was better. And then it all of a sudden began to take off.
Interesting. Yeah, we've definitely got to do something about that.
You got to sit at McDonald's, mate.
You got to sit at McDonald's.
No, what you need to do, what I did is just look for businesses that weren't in my industry, but as I say, what was a high volume business with low margins and how do they make money?
Yeah.
And once you figure that out, look at what your business is, think about another business that's doing it well. I love the story of Boost Juice and Janine Ellis. We're all familiar with it as startups in this country. She's been one of the most successful entrepreneurs. I had read her book, was obsessed with her book, went through this juice cleansing diet where I was only eating Boost Juice 3 times a day for like 2 months. It was great. I lost like 10 kilos. It was wonderful. Couldn't wait to meet Janine. She came into the office, interviewed her, and we just didn't click. And I was really, really upset. I was like, and you know, they say never meet your heroes. It was that moment.
Yeah.
And you know who said never meet your heroes? Janine Ellis in the podcast that I've been listening to.
Fuck.
So excited to meet her. And there I was getting the same advice from that very woman.
Wow.
And not that she isn't magnificent, but she didn't have anything to teach me in my media business because her business was completely different to mine.
Yeah, well, that was the thing we were speaking about earlier. I spoke about this great book, Cable Cowboy, about John Malone and TCI. I know you're a fan of...
Now I'm just sitting here looking at all your books.
Yeah, there's quite a few. But that's the one I just finished last week. Fantastic book. I know you've studied the Murdoch dynasty. I've got that on my Amazon playlist. There's probably one decent book about Murdoch. Ted Turner, I haven't read any books on him yet. Like I said, learn a lot from studying these guys myself.
But it's not what they tell you, it's what they don't.
Exactly.
It's so interesting. So there was a book by a guy, Schofield, is his surname, forgotten his first name, called Me and Ted Against the World.
Okay.
And Ted might have been the owner, but this was the guy who really started CNN. He was the news director and almost the chief operating officer. He's the guy who had to go buy the tape machines, hire the staff, set up the bureaus, do leasing agreements in New York. This is the guy who had to do the job and deal with the effing nightmares of the job. And when I left Sky, I bought this book off Amazon and I read it. I think I've read it about 5 times and given it to everyone at Ticker to read. And even though this is 1980 that this happened, it's exactly the same.
Well, so by someone Schofield?
Yeah. I can't remember his first name.
What's the name?
Me and Ted Against the World.
Me and Ted Against the World.
Yeah.
Okay.
It should be Ted and I Against the World in classic English, but I guess if you're writing a book, you're going to put yourself first, right?
When you think about it today then, who are the leaders that you're really in the media space looking at and trying to study what they're doing and not what they're saying?
Look, I still think Rupert does a great job. I'm a huge fan of his business sense. I'm not going to get involved in your thoughts on Fox News, etc. That's what a lot of people think. I would always say, yeah, he might own Fox News, but he also owned The Simpsons, which took the piss out of Fox News. So how bad can he really be? He did things that the industry needed to do. He has saved newspapers that otherwise would have failed. I'm a fan of anyone who puts their money where their mouth is, and he has done so. There's a great interview I was watching on YouTube the other night. It's a 1-hour interview in his own words with Rupert. It's probably about 6 years ago now that he did it.
Really?
But I've watched it so many times just since I first found it a few weeks ago. And he's spot on. You know, he's spot on about how people will pay for news. When you are a media mogul, you are, in fact, a public psychologist. You have to know what are the trends, what is the mood of society at the moment. Now, I have no interest in getting involved in politics. I actually said to my 2IC, you know, it's really funny when you look and you read all these things about media moguls. They've always done it for a reason. They've always had a reason to own Sky News or Fox News or CNN. They've always been involved in changing presidents or prime ministers. I just have no interest in that. That's not why I'm doing this. So it's like you have to find your reason for running a media network.
What's your North Star then?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I don't think you actually need to have one these days. I think once upon a time, it was a little bit like owning a church. News was like a religion. You know, it had to be something of integrity and of trust, and it would tell people what was happening. For me, I love the idea of a different viewpoint that just tells it how it sees it. On the
like
road,
almost like a skeptical view?
No. It's not cynical. It's not like
Not
I
cynical,
get the
but
sense
just-
that we are living in unprecedented times in terms of who the hell knows what's going to happen next. Like, will it be China? Will it be India? Will it be North Korea? What's going on with Trump? We've got this coronavirus pandemic. The financial markets have been all over the place. I get a front seat to that every single day. And that excites me every single day. And now we've got a bunch of journalists who are doing the same. So when you ask, what is the North Star? Isn't that enough? Isn't it enough to just want to be part of history as opposed to wanting to
Make history.
make it?
Yeah.
To decide it?
Do you know, it's funny you say that because my favorite ever comedian, George Carlin, used to always say, and he used to get interviews with this when he'd do interviews with Oprah or others, and they'd say, what do you want? What's the point of doing this? He's just, I love being at the front row of the freak show.
That's
There's
exactly how I
nothing
see
better.
it. Yeah. I mean, what else would I do? Go back to Woolies and ask people how their day is. Very important job, I might add, but that's not what I want to do.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. And I think, I had a question on storytelling, and you've said in the past that any good media business needs a great story told by a great storyteller. Someone who can paint a picture that's visualized. Often you've had people in and they're talking about a thing, but then you just get them to literally show it on air.
Yeah. Show, don't tell.
Is there anything in particular today that really you have in the way of principles for storytelling with Ticker?
Yeah. So just back on your earlier point, I guess the thing that really drives me on a day-to-day basis, for a lot of people, it's a fear of failure. I grew up in a very working class family, believing, even in this day and age, that you could never become something else. You were destined to die in the same class that you were born, as if we were on the Titanic. And it's not that I have any desire to become wealthy, but what I love is that today, for the first time in the history of the world, you can become a media magnate without having to have gone to a private school.
Or have daddy's money.
Or have your parents' money or any of these things. That you can literally take a risk, turn off that thing in the back of your head that says, what are people going to think if you fail? Once you turn that off, you can do anything, I might add. Once it's like people who've had near-death experiences come back and they go, right, before that was basically the audition or the rehearsal, now I'm going to live my fucking life. And that's how I feel, right? I've had that many experiences. When I was younger, I drowned. I actually fell underwater when I was about 3 years old, Awful family tragedy. I fell underwater in a pool, in a backyard pool, and was brain dead and was in the Royal Children's Hospital for days or weeks, I'm not sure. And they had said, my mum tells me the story all the time, that all the children around me were dying. They had also fallen into pools in the ward. And they had said to my parents that if I regain consciousness, I'll never be able to talk or ever be able to read. There'd be no way. And it feels like from that moment, it was about basically saying there's no such thing as an expert. You can do anything you want to do.
Yeah.
And we live in this world where everyone will tell you who you can become, what you're going to be, how far you can go. But that inner resilience, I guess, is the driving thing. I have no idea where Ticker's going to be in a year's time. I had no idea where it was going to be when I first launched it. I had a logo, I had a name, I had an idea, but the market was going to tell me what it was going to be. Rupert Murdoch talks about when the iPad launched. I remember it quite well. I was the first Australian to get an iPad, by the way. I lined up Fifth Avenue Apple Store in New York City on launch day of the iPad back, it was 10 or 12 years ago now. And there I was waiting for it, got it, did all these interviews. When I came back with my iPad,
Really?
Channel 9 News, the Herald Sun were all looking at it going, this is the future. And
It wasn't.
no, Rupert spent $40 million on something called The Daily, believing that the future was this new brand on an iPad. And the fact was, people didn't want a new brand. What they wanted was existing brands to make their way across to a new device. So Ticker is a new news brand, and that's one of the hardest things you can launch. Imagine launching a new religion. As I said, news is a bit like people get their news the way that people used to get, the truth from a Bible. They have their trusted sources, and that's what they go to. So he made a mistake in doing that by launch, and he speaks about it quite openly. Trying to launch a news brand in a little market like Australia became quite clear quite quickly that we had to outgrow domestic news.
God, I feel like I could sit here picking your brain for hours, but I know you do have to. You got to head to Sydney at some point today. I can't stop you flying up.
It's the first time we've been to Sydney since we launched Ticker, actually.
Right?
And at first we couldn't wait to get to Sydney. It was like, we're going to meet with this person, that. And then we realised that actually we can't wait to get to Singapore.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to Sydney for the next couple of days, and it'll be great to catch up with people. But there isn't that Sydney is everything mentality.
It's not as exciting.
No.
Yeah, I'm meant to be going up in Sydney in May to meet with a social platform. And I've got the same vibe. I'd rather be getting to Singapore, I think, after speaking to another one that is based in Singapore. All right, rapid fire questions to finish things off.
Sure.
Have you watched Succession?
Yes.
Okay, what do you think?
Well, I only have a dog, and unless I get a second dog, I shouldn't have the same issues.
Okay. Are you hanging for the next? I've heard they're filming the next series of.
Yeah, well, I think it has been filmed. It should have been dropped by now.
Oh no! I don't know when it's going to be later this year. When
what
it drops.
I love would have been the conversations at Foxtel, who have the rights to all HBO content, about whether or not they should run Succession or not. That's where my brain goes. So you're talking about the fictional show of Succession. Great, clearly based on the Murdochs.
Yeah,
but what I want to know is what really goes on when there's like an output deal where they're like, so you get Succession, and they're like, we don't want to run that, or we can't wait to run that. But I've watched it. Really, really well done.
It's a brilliant series. I think the way there's something endearing about the family, the way they portray it, I reckon, in a weird way.
But family-run businesses are pretty frightening, aren't they?
They are. I mean,
all of the different things going on, you can have that.
My dad's a fourth-generation printer. Similar vibes. It's the same reason why I didn't get into the family business. Yeah,
but I mean, it's like when CEOs resign and they say, I want to spend more time with my family. Who the hell has ever wanted to spend more time with their family?
Well, those types, those A-type individuals definitely don't.
Maybe.
Morning and evening routine, what does that look like at the moment?
Mornings, I wake up, I read everything. I then spent about 10 minutes on TikTok for a laugh.
Yes.
I found myself massively into TikTok.
Well, I'm going to have to get in on Ticker and talk about TikTok.
And then from there, for sure, you're quite welcome. And then from there, the dog basically says, it's my time now.
Yeah.
An 8-month-old Labrador puppy. So as you can imagine, much of my life is about making sure that he's okay. He's called Tucker. He was going to be called Ticker. But then I thought if I sold the business, I'd have to give up the dog. Or have IP issues. So walk the dog, talk to my father on the phone, who gives me a really grounded experience of the world, head into the office, catch up with everyone. I sit in the newsroom with everyone. I don't sit in a locked away office. I think that any leader of an organisation who separates themselves from everybody loses an understanding of what's going on. However, there is a lot to be said for separating yourself so that you can focus on the vision. So at about 11 a.m. I go home every day. I live 3 minutes from the office. So I drive home and then scooter back. I always feel that every founder needs to own a scooter. So I sit at home and I watch CNN, see what the opposition's up to, consume as much content as I can, make sure that we have a point of difference, that we are getting any good talent that they're getting, constantly messaging our news leads and producers about ideas, what we should be doing for the afternoon. And then I go in at about 2:00 again and spend about 4 or so hours just. People just like to know you're around, and then meetings with people, new people who want to come into the business, advertisers. I'm kind of the person who gets wheeled out now in front of advertisers to tell some fun stories.
That's a good stage to be in.
And then they push me back into my little cupboard again. But I trust everyone in the team, right? Everyone has a job and a responsibility, and I love that they all own what they do. I've never worked in a more engaging workplace than I have at Ticker. And Sky was wonderful. I had a wonderfully engaged experience there. But in the end, it's a corporation, right?
Yeah.
And we're still this growing organization, and that's the fun times. When you're sitting in ongoing HR meetings, that ain't the fun part.
Yeah.
So, and mark my words, I'll never sit in one of them.
Evening, how do you sort of decompress at night when you can?
I go for a bike ride. I see my friends. I'm described as one of the most social people, even though I don't actually feel that way. I feel like I'm quite an introvert, would you believe?
Really?
Yeah, I know. It's bizarre to say, but I do. My time with Ahron is the best time.
Perhaps you're ambiverted.
Right. Well, yeah. Does that mean both?
A little bit of both. Like
Okay.
You need time to recuperate and rest.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, but too much and I start to go a bit batty. So
I'm the same.
Too much Ahron time is too much time.
Yeah, I need time to decompress and have my thoughts to myself.
But I sit on YouTube. I just spend so much time on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
And the recommends
YouTube,
thing
TikTok.
is unbelievable. Like I've always had this thing, you never do a survey to ask people what they like. Just look at their YouTube history. It tells you everything. Imagine if like all of our Google history could be watched by someone else. Like that's a psychological lesson, right?
Imagine that on job applications.
Yeah. And why did you look this up? Like that's the thing. That's what's great.
All right, last question for you. If you could have a billboard anywhere in Australia, where would it be and what would it say?
It would say, at the airport, make sure you tell everyone about us.
Ticker. That's it.
Ticker. Yeah. Can you do that again? That was great. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's like
that'll be on the billboard. Actually,
I was watching some old like ads recently, and this thing comes into my head. We were talking about Big Kev on the last interview. Big Kev and I'm excited. And
Did he die?
Did he?
I think he died.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It was always a weird brand. Like he was always targeting sort of white goods, very specific product, and it was very interesting. Also, the Snappy Tom ads were like the cats of Australia.
How good were the old jingles? Whatever happened to jingles?
Yeah,
remember jingles? Like
there's no more Mojo agency.
No, true.
We're trying to bring that back. Bring back the Mojo.
The Mojo.
Ahron, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Tickernews.co. I've got to give a plug first for them because they pay the bills.
Yeah.
But I'm on Instagram, Ahron.Young, I think, Twitter, Ahron Young. LinkedIn is probably my most used platform these days. It's where everyone comes to. And then my email is aaron@tickernews.co because if you can't get me on any of the others, you can hassle me there.
Yeah. Ahron, thank you
But that's
so
how
much.
you guys got onto me, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure I showed Jacob the lay of the land of how to pitch people, find people and all that. It's a great skill to have.
Well, I've sat as a journo for many years and you do whatever the hell you can do to get into people.
Whatever
it
what you
takes.
can, use whatever you can. Hunter.io, we've had all the fun with that sort of stuff. Ahron, thank you so much for coming in.
And by the way, congratulations for this weekend getting married.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
This will be out next week, so I'll be officially married, hopefully.
Well,
hopefully no cold feet.
You have no idea what goes on anymore, right? It's like 20 minutes, anything could happen.
Exactly. Ahron, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. If you do like it, please subscribe and, of course, like if you're watching the YouTube video as well. We'd really appreciate that. You can also find our Clips channel in the description. For audio, if you're not already listening, you can search Uncommon on Pocket Cast, Spotify and Apple Podcasts quite easily. For video, if you're not watching, you can search Uncommon on YouTube. And for behind the scenes takes and clips on social media, then definitely check out @uncommon_show on Instagram. But otherwise, look, thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, thanks for listening.